Even the Nazis wanted him dead. Educated psychopath, serial killer, merciless monster. Marcel Petiot, also known as Dr. Satan, systematically lured, murdered, dissected, and dismembered those desperate to flee France during World War II. Just how did a mere man earn the name Dr. Satan? Was a doctor capable of all this suffering? Settle in, because his reign of terror started long before he killed a single soul. Born in the French city of Auxerre on January 17, 1897, it seems he was a troublesome and dangerous from the moment he was conscious. He was suspended on multiple occasions, threw knives at his classmates, threatened a pupil with his father's gun, abused animals, stole, and smashed public property. He was finally deemed mentally ill by a child psychiatrist. At 19, he volunteered to fight for the French army in the trenches of World War I.
The young Marcel Petiot was thrown right into the middle of this violence and destruction. It was likely he was unstable to begin with, and the combat experience only made his condition worse.
He was exposed to gas and wounded in battle, after which he suffered a mental breakdown. He was sent to an army recovery home to be looked after, but developed an affinity for stealing morphine, army blankets, and people's personal items, including love letters and photos from loved ones. He was briefly jailed before being sent to a psychiatric ward. One psychiatrist wrote that he was mentally disturbed, suffering from mental disequilibrium, neurasthenia, mental depression, melancholia, obsessions, and phobias. He complained about headaches, blackouts, and sleepwalking. At one point, a doctor said his tongue was badly injured because he was always biting it during convulsions. He added that Petiot had an indifference about his life. Despite these evaluations, he returned to the army, but not a month later, he somehow wounded himself in the foot.
A fellow soldier in Petiot's unit told his superiors that he saw Petiot intentionally wound himself.
He was discharged for abnormal behavior and given a disability pension. In 1919, at 22, he was released from a mental institution. With the war now over, Petiot joined an accelerated medical education program for war veterans, where he excelled. After completing this medical degree, he set up a practice in his town of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. Still very cunning and lacking a conscience, he fabricated his credibility to the town. One flyer he distributed said, "Dr. Petiot is young, and only a young doctor can keep up to date on the latest methods born of a progress which marches with giant strides." Dr. Petiot treats, but does not exploit his patients. Before long, people were flocking to his door. He would treat anything and everything with morphine. One child patient almost died from a morphine overdose. By this time, he was also addicted to narcotics. He enrolled his new trove of patients into a government program, ensuring that he could charge both the government and the private patient for his services. Petiot began an affair with Louise Delvaux, the daughter of one of his patients. A few months later, she mysteriously disappeared. Petiot's neighbors reported seeing him loading a heavy trunk into the back of his car. Strangely enough, Louise's parents' house was also broken into and was burned to the ground. Later, a trunk resembling Petiot's was pulled from the river. Inside were the badly decomposing remains of a young woman who was not investigated. The psychopath then decided that he fancied politics and wanted to become the town mayor. After sabotaging his opponent, he won the mayorship. In 1927, at age 30, he married 23-year-old Georgette Labia, the daughter of a wealthy landowner. They had a child. Although he now held power and was very respectable, there were still rumors circling him.
He had a reputation for supplying narcotics, performing illegal terminations, stealing, and engaging in dubious financial arrangements.
He was accused of stealing various things from the town, including oil cans, a drum, and a stone cross. He was fined 200 francs and sentenced to 3 months in prison, but he managed to get the sentence reversed and continued freely committing atrocities. He was suspected of burning down the home of a dairy unionist. When cops entered, they found the man's wife, rumored to be Petiot's mistress, beaten to death with a blunt instrument. 20,000 francs were also missing, and footprints were found leading from the house to Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. Witness had also seen Petiot near the house on the night of the fire and was willing to testify. However, with little choice, he was forced to visit Petiot to treat an ailment. He was given an injection and was dead just hours later. A few years later, complaints piled up and he was forced to resign as mayor. With a stained reputation, he moved to Paris, where he yet again created a very popular practice using false documents. Morphine was again handed out for any ailment. Naturally, people became addicted and patients were queuing up to see him. There were plenty more incidents that demonstrated what a twisted man he was. One of his victims was 30-year-old Raymond Hans. She came to him complaining about abscesses in her mouth. Petiot performed surgery on her, and she would never regain consciousness. She was pronounced dead a few hours later. Upon autopsy, it was found that she was full of morphine. Petiot once beat up a cop that tried to arrest him for shoplifting. He ended up in court again. Weeping, he attributed his behavior to one of his funny attacks and pointed to his time in the army as proof of his mental illness. The court chalked it up to temporary insanity and didn't charge him.
He tells people what they want to hear, which is always what a good con man will do.
Once again, he went to court for tax evasion, claiming just 10% of what he actually made. And once again, he cried and talked himself out of the charges. But his most infamous actions occurred during the chaos of World War II and the German occupation of France. Taking advantage of the chaos and confusion, Petiot lured people, mostly Jews, trying to escape Nazi persecution, into his trap with promises of safe passage out of the country in return for 25,000 francs.
He promised escape, liberation from the war-torn streets outside.
He advertised his services as a doctor who could help people escape arrest or deportation by providing them with false documents and passage to South America. In 1941, Petiot, now operating under the name Dr. Eugene, was earning so much money that he bought a house on Rue La Sueur and used it as his base. Instead of providing the promised escape, Petiot murdered his victims here, often with poison, and stole their valuables.
Petiot has maybe a sort of slightly earthier human drive that he seems to want money, although it's not clear what he ever does with that.
He disposed of bodies in various ways, including dissolving them in quicklime, throwing the remains into the Seine River, and burning them in his furnace.
The clinical nature of his killing is quite striking, and maybe one of the more disturbing aspects of the case, actually.
By then, Dr. Eugene became a popular name. Refugees flocked to him with money, hoping to escape, and he killed every single one. Even the Gestapo heard the rumors of a man helping Jews escape, and the commanders gave orders that he was to be caught immediately. Among his victims were the Neller family, German Jews who had narrowly avoided the Nazis.
Gestapo came to the Kneller's apartment. Fortunately, they weren't at home at the time. Unfortunately, they decided to escape using Dr. Petiot's escape network.
The Neller family, a couple with their young boy, are the first of 9 dissected bodies found in the river. The couple was found dismembered, and the 8-year-old boy was found vertically sectioned. Police were unable to link the murders to anyone. In 1943, Petiot's fake network was infiltrated by Nazi collaborator Charles Beretta. He told the Nazi names of people who had applied to escape. 3 of these people were arrested and tortured until they gave up the name Dr. Eugene. Petiot was then arrested, tortured, and sent to prison. After 8 months, when it became obvious he knew nothing, they released him. However, on March 11, 1944, Petiot's luck would come to an end. His neighbors had become fed up with the foul odor coming from his house and smoke constantly billowing from the chimney. When firefighters entered, they found a grim scene. A large coal-burning stove, mutilated body parts burning in the fire, assorted rib cages, jawbones, chunks of charred flesh, human hair, human remains stored in bags, and a quicklime pit.
On the staircase leading from the courtyard to the basement, police found a canvas sack containing the headless left half of a corpse.
There were enough dismembered body parts to make up 10 people.
In the kitchen, a wide counter was installed with a large deep sink. Allegedly, this was where Petiot dismembered the bodies.
There were also 49 suitcases containing belongings. Petiot's name was strewn across the papers.
As Petiot murders, dissects and dispatches victim after victim, the press will later claim that this killing spree is motivated by a vicious bloodlust.
Though Petiot evaded police, they discovered something else. A room fitted to be a doctor's examination room, and attached was a small triangular room with heavy-duty bolts that only be opened from the outside. Even more chilling, a peephole directly across from the bolts. It was Dr. Satan's torture chamber. Petiot took advantage of his fans who ignored the news about him and harbored with them. They were still convinced he was a successful doctor and enemy of the Nazi. His story was even more believable when he joined the French forces of the interior under a new name, Henri Valéry, became captain, leading interrogations. Petiot was recognized at a metro station and was arrested. He was carrying a gun, a large quantity of money, and at least 50 different identity documents. Petiot's trial began on March 19, 1946. During the trial, the defense argued that Petiot had only killed enemies of France and that he had nothing to do with the house full of dead bodies. However, many members of the Resistance said they'd never seen him. He continued to provide conflicting statements and presented an erratic defense.
And Petiot had been so defiant and announced ahead of time that he was going to have fun, that this was going to be an entertaining trial.
He admitted to killing 63 enemies of France but accepted no guilt whatsoever. On March 29, 1946, he was found guilty of 27 counts of murder and stealing some 200 million francs and a bounty of cash, gold, and jewelry, which were never found. At one point, the judge became irritated at Petiot for doodling instead of paying attention. Petiot responded with, "I am listening, but it doesn't really interest me very much." He didn't even seem the least bit bothered when they told him he was to be executed by guillotine. On the day, May 25, 1946, he was said to have been very calm. He declined seeing a priest, saying he wanted to take his baggage with him. He took a last cigarette before his hands were tied. A witness later said he moved with ease as though he were walking into his office for a routine appointment. His last words were, "Gentlemen, I ask you not to look. This will not be very pretty." At 5:05 a.m., Petiot smiled for the last time as the blade dropped. Some people even claimed that there was still a smile etched to his face as his head fell into the basket. Petiot's claim of being a Resistance member was widely regarded as fabrication and a ploy to escape the consequences of his actions. He attempted to portray himself as a hero of the Resistance, but instead, he lives in lasting infamy as one of the most notorious serial killers in history.